All right, it's a couple of minutes past the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. It is August 13th, 2020. This is our August Canvas meeting called Autism Network Virtual Association of Scholars. Glad many of you could join us. All of you could join us today. We know that many of you might be viewing this after the fact via our video recording. I'm just going to ask at this time to make sure that your microphone is please muted. If you're not speaking, that way we can cut out any background noise. I know many of you have already added your name to the meeting agenda. If you have not already done so, please do so at this time and highlight it as well. We're really glad that you could be here as we continue our series of wonderful speakers, and we'll have some updates from here at College Autism Network. If you don't know me already, my name is Brett Nachman. I'm with College Autism Network. Likely you've received emails from me. And we know many of you are on our Canvas listserv, which is really a great mechanism for learning about forthcoming meetings, receiving meeting minutes, and video recordings after the fact. And this also serves as a great database for sharing resources, including articles, updates about new research studies. We know some of you are embedded in that sphere and use this as a tool for recruiting participants and generating interest. And also just sometimes getting advice and feedback from others. So we highly encourage you to be part of the community if you are not already. Couple other things also too is that on our College Autism Network website, we have an ongoing and very iterative list of US-based autism-specific college programs, college support programs that serve students. And we're updating this a few times each year to reflect the addition of new programs that are emerging at different places. And if you are connected to one or know of one that is not on the list, we highly encourage you to email us and we can explore that accordingly. We'll get to our guest speakers in just a few minutes, and I'll gladly introduce them. But we also want to let everyone know about, if you haven't already, we've been promoting it quite a lot, which is our College Autism Summit. This used to be our College Inclusion Summit, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lee Williams to share some updates on that front.
Hi, thanks, Brett, and hello, everybody. Yeah, so October 27th to 30th, a virtual event. So that's going to be, I think, really wonderful as far as helping people be more able to get there from around the world. We just closed our call for programs and have received over 60 really outstanding program proposals. And so we're working our way through those. We have two major speakers at this point. Rabia Rashid, who's the creator of that you're going to listen from. Sorry, I'm having Rabia Rashid, who's the creator of the Netflix series Atypical, is our opening speaker, and Anthony Pasilio from JP Morgan Chase, who's the head of Global Autism at Work initiative there, is our closing speaker. Registration is now open, and I will drop the website for the summit in the chat box, so you can grab that there and take a look at it. And one other thing is that we are very interested in organizational or institutional sponsorship. That helps us keep the price of the summit low. And so if you're interested in sponsorship, there's some information on the website, and you can also email me at any point with any questions, and I'll drop my email in the chat as well. That's it.
All right, thank you, Lee. And we are looking forward to having a more thorough schedule out closer to date. It's going to be really robust and offering a wide variety of programming and making sure that that there are options for participation no matter where you are located around the world. So it's going to be quite exciting. So we're going to continue to share updates as time moves forward. Also, at this time, we want to pass it over to our colleagues in really, it's just very robust at this point, a working group. I'm going to turn it over to TC Wiseman to share some updates on that front.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. So just a really quick update. We're doing our cross-institutional collaboration research on autism and UD training for faculty. This is under the leadership of Kristen Gillespie Lynch, and we're right now, first of all, this training was developed by through participatory methods with all autistic individuals like myself throughout the whole training development. We're through our IRB stage. Our ethics for most of the collaborating institutes are now done. The plan now is to pilot the study late next week and to move into recruitment mode. So we're pretty excited about that. So we're welcoming any faculty or TA who are teaching at colleges or universities this semester who might want to strengthen your knowledge about and your understanding of autism, and to learn about how to use UD tools in your syllabi design for both online courses and real-time courses. So if anybody's interested, I'll pop in the chat box our little informational website, which is autismresearch.international. So we're very excited. We're going to get going next week.
So exciting, and website and everything. Love it. And as Stacey shared, there's many ways in which many of you can play a role in spreading the word and testing it out. So hang on one second. I'm just, in addition to hosting, I play the role of the administration and trying to get everything to look all right on all of your end. At this point, we want to allocate a little bit of space toward if anybody has any resources they'd like to share, whether it be articles, research studies, whatever the case may be. You'll see in the meeting agenda we have a little spot where you can insert an article or link or whatever the case may be, and you can put your name next to it. Also, you're welcome to do that in our chat, and folks can access that at their own time. What we do on our end is we catalog all of that information and put it in meeting minutes, so you don't have to have 50 different tabs open on your computer. But I'd like to open it up to the larger group. If there are particular resources you'd like to share, this is a great time to do so.
I would love to share with everybody. Hi, it's Claire from the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation. But that the Frist Center has started a monthly webinar series that will always have autistic presenters and or panelists. So if anyone's interested in jumping on that each month, we will cover different topics that will probably be of interest to this group. And there's one this afternoon, so I'll put the link to that in the chat.
Awesome, thank you, Claire.
Speaking of the Frist Center, I want to share the good news that they've got some really interesting programming going on. And right now, Dr. Beth Mello in their medical school at Vanderbilt has released a toolkit supporting teens and young adults on the autism spectrum, setting and pursuing self-determined goals. Really interesting work that's going on there, and I am happy to drop a PDF of that in the chat box and encourage folks to take a look at Beth's team's work.
Great, thank you, Lee. Eric, I know you had a few articles listed in the agenda. I'm not sure if you'd like to speak to them at this time, but feel free to go ahead if you'd like.
Sure. I mean, I don't know any more than what's in the articles. I imagine there might be folks in the meeting who know more about them than I do. One was about the new Center for Autism Inclusivity to train SUNY Empire faculty and staff to better educate students with autism. It's actually a few things mentioned in this article, including it says SUNY Empire will be first college in nation to offer comprehensive autism supports in fully online programs to support individualized in-person education. It also mentions that the Center for Autism Inclusivity will work with high schools throughout New York State to identify qualified students with ASD to enroll at SUNY Empire. That was one piece. Again, there might be folks in the meeting who are more familiar with this initiative. The second was an article in Nature Communications where they compared, they looked at some data sets of over 600,000 individuals and found that compared to cisgender individuals, transgender and gender diverse individuals have on average high rates of autism, other neurodevelopmental and psychiatric diagnoses, as well as higher levels of autistic traits. And I believe the rates of autism were like 3 to 6 times higher in this population. So probably not, you know, surprising in general, but it was a pretty large data set, so it caught my attention.
Thanks for sharing, Eric. Other resources that folks would like to share? Otherwise, as I said, you're welcome to do so more informally outside of this context via the listserv or in the chat box throughout the meeting.
Also, it's like discouraged to use marijuana during pregnancy. Like, women still use marijuana, and it's 1 times likely that the child will develop autism. I'll send the link for everyone to see. I was looking over it, and it was surprising that women use marijuana during pregnancy.
Yes, I think there was something on the listserv in regards to a study regarding marijuana use among autistic individuals. So that was posted, I think, within the past couple of days. So thanks for making reference to that, Bella. Okay. And I know there's a few other links. Yep, thank you for putting that in there too. So yes, please feel free to use the chat throughout today's meeting toward sharing links or questions. At this point, I want to definitely make sure we turn it over to our guest speakers. We're really glad to have 2 folks joining on today discussing essentially autistic students dropping out of college and what those experiences are. So we have Dr. Eilidh Cage from University of Stirling, and also Jack Howes, who's an autistic writer and fundraiser. We're really glad to have them talk about their work, and I know there are some articles associated with this as well. So I'm going to turn it over to them at this point. Definitely want to encourage you to use the chat box. If you have any questions for them, we're going to have a Q&A allocated following their presentation, but feel free to use the space as they're speaking toward getting those thoughts and ideas and questions ready to go. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Eilidh and Jack.
Hello. Thank you very much, Brett. I've got the slides, so let me just get these up. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Okay, hopefully you can see those slides. Okay, I'm just going to scroll because I can't see Jack anymore. There you are. So thank you again to Brett for inviting us to speak about our research. And thank you for allowing us to do this meeting at this time. It's just like a slightly earlier time in the US than here in Scotland, where it's past 4 p.m. So appreciate that you're all here bright and early for some of you. As Brett said, we're talking about our research here on dropping out and understanding why autistic students seem to be at higher risk of dropping out of university. So just a little bit of background and context about who we actually are. So in case you want to see a bigger picture of my face, this is me on the left. So my name's Eilidh. I'm a lecturer in psychology here at the University of Stirling over in Scotland. I did my PhD at the Centre for Research in Autism and Education at UCL down in London, finished that back in 2015, and only moved back to Scotland earlier this year. But I did so because, as you can see from this picture, it's the most wonderful country and beautiful place. This is a picture of Stirling itself. So one day when we're allowed to travel again, I do encourage you to come to Scotland if you've not been already. And Jack will just tell you about himself.
Okay, so my name is Jack. I am an autistic writer, researcher, and fundraiser based in Enfield, North London. And to provide some context as to my role in this research, so I'm autistic myself, and I dropped out from the University of Kent in 2011. I was diagnosed as autistic around 6 months afterwards. And as you can see there, that is a picture of me from many years ago when I was younger, fitter, and had a much better haircut than I have now after 5 months of having no haircuts in lockdown. And if Amy clicks for the next picture, the football/soccer fans amongst you may recognise what this next picture is. That is the magnificent Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where I am a season ticket holder. It's my spiritual home, and it's a place where I have lived out many of my dreams and also many of my nightmares.
So that's a little bit about us. Now we're just going to talk about our research and a few statistics as well, from the UK in particular, where we're based. So, of course, we all know that autistic students have a range of different strengths and difficulties within higher education environments. And what's brilliant to see is more and more autistic students coming and studying at university. And so this figure, if you can see, hopefully, this is just stats from the UK. And we've seen in the last 10-year period a big increase in the number of autistic students coming and studying. But of course, there'll be lots out there who don't disclose and aren't in these official statistics. But what's concerning as well is the fact that lots of autistic students seem to drop out of their studies and aren't able to complete. And I was interested when I started looking into this to find there was a surprising lack of research on this topic. There doesn't seem to be much out there trying to understand why autistic people might be more likely to drop out of university. So as well, Jack's just mentioned the fact that he dropped out as well. And lots of people I spoke to told me similar experiences. So I was interested to know more about this and understand why. And Jack came on board when we realized we had this shared interest in trying to make sure this research would be applicable to lots of people. And so we decided to use both survey and interview methods to try and look at this issue, because it's exploratory in many ways. And I think, more research needs to be done, but we wanted to just see what's out there to start off with. And I'll talk a little bit about the survey we did, and then Jack will talk about our interviews. So the survey aimed specifically to understand different factors that might be linking to the higher risk of non-completion for autistic students. And this was an exploratory survey. So with Jack was involved in helping me identify different possible reasons why people might drop out, and he helped me design the survey itself. So we talked a lot about how diagnosis and disclosure might relate to people, maybe like Jack himself, he was diagnosed later in life after university. So maybe not having a diagnosis and not realizing that you're autistic might stop you from getting the support you need when at university. And even if you have a diagnosis, do you then disclose that to your university so that you can access support? So that was one variable that we looked at in this study. We were also interested in looking in academic experiences themselves. If someone has a good experience in terms of actual lectures and seminars, are they satisfied with their grades and that sort of thing? And we're very interested in the social side as well. So does someone feel like they fit in to their university? Do they feel part of the community of students? Do they identify with the university that they go to? Or do they feel lonely when they're at uni? And of course, we all know that mental well-being, we see lots of difficulties with mental health within autistic people. But perhaps if there's autistic students who really still struggle with their mental health, this could have a big impact on decisions to drop out because they might not be getting the support they need for their mental health. And so dropping out might be the best thing to do to protect their mental health. We also looked at sensory aspects because the university sensory atmosphere can be quite intense. There can be various lights and noises, and for people in halls, Jack himself has talked a lot about how the student halls were quite a nightmare sensory-wise. So we wanted to include that as a variable as well. And finally, we were also interested in that initial transition to university in the first place, because if that process doesn't go so well, you'd imagine that could have a lot of knock-on effects on these other variables. So we looked at these different variables and tried to measure them in quantified ways. And with the survey, it was 230 autistic adults who completed all these measures looking at these different variables. Within this, it was open to people who had graduated, not just people who had dropped out. So there was 151 who had graduated, and then 34 people who had graduated after several attempts. So I decided to have this as a separate group because they seemed to be quite unique in that they'd been to university, had an experience of dropping out, but then gone back and managed to graduate. And then there were 45 people who had not completed their studies at all. And in terms of demographics, most were female, of the mean age about 33. So it was people reflecting back on their experiences at university. So that's a bit of a limitation. It wasn't current students, it was people reflecting. And most did study in the UK, but when I looked to check for differences by country, I actually didn't find any difference according to where people had studied. So just to draw on the key findings, so essentially what we did was to compare these three groups that I mentioned, those who'd graduated after several attempts, and those who had not completed. So here I'm just going to talk about the three kind of key areas where we find significant differences between these groups. So firstly, with the transition to university, those who did not complete found the transition more difficult and reported a less positive transition experience. So they found that initial stage of just going to university much more challenging than those who had graduated. Secondly, in terms of academic experiences, again, those who did not complete reported a poorer academic experience overall. So they hadn't enjoyed studying, they hadn't enjoyed their lectures, and they just had found those academic elements really quite challenging. And then finally, we find differences in the social experiences. So those who didn't complete reported lower social identification. So they didn't really feel that they fit in at all and didn't socially identify, for example, as a University of Stirling student. And as well, they didn't have as much organizational identification. So they didn't feel at all they were part of a community with other students. So another little analysis I did was to match a group of people who graduated to those who did not complete on age and gender and country to just control for those variables, and then wanted to see which variables were the best predictors of non-completion. And here this analysis found that the difficulty with the transition to university was the only significant predictor of completion. So suggesting that perhaps that transition thing might be one of the key variables. Unfortunately, in this study, we couldn't analyze in terms of interactions between different variables, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think that transition, probably has knock-on effects. Things like the academic experience, that needs to be good from day one, ideally. And the social side of things as well. If you're not feeling like you're part of your student halls, socially you're feeling left out of things, again, that might relate to that transition of not going so well. So that's our key findings for that. And now Jack is just going to talk about our interview study.
Yeah, thank you, Eilidh. So after we completed the survey, we then conducted 14 in-depth, we conducted 14 in-depth semi-structured interviews with autistic people who had been to university in the UK and then dropped out. And by semi-structured, what we mean is that we asked all 14 correspondents the same questions, but we would occasionally adapt a question or ask a new question to get a greater sense of context, personal information, that sort of thing. So of the 14 autistic people we interviewed, 7 were male, 7 female, and they had a mean age of 31. And in terms of diagnosis status, only 3 had been diagnosed before they started at university. 1 was diagnosed at university, and the remaining 10 were diagnosed afterwards. And again, of those that we interviewed, they had a very diverse range of experiences. So some were mature students. One poor person dropped out of 3 separate universities and dropped out of all of them. I feel very sorry for them, whereas others had dropped out and gone back to study later on in life and graduated. So Eilidh conducted the 14 interviews herself, and she conducted these via email, Skype, and mobile phone. She then typed up transcripts of all 14 interviews, and then me and Eilidh analysed in detail all 14 transcripts, went away, came up with our own findings, and then we came together to formulate 3 overarching themes of why autistic people dropped out of university, and those 3 overarching themes you can see on the screen now. So to discuss the first overarching theme, that is systemic issues, and by systemic issues we mean underlying core structural issues which impact on autistic people on a day-to-day basis. And I think the main systemic issue that we uncovered was a lack of autism understanding. And all the autistic people listening to me now, I'm sure you all have your own anecdotes of when people in your life had no true understanding at all of what autism meant, how it manifested itself, how it changed your behaviours or your mannerisms. And I would say, frankly, as an autistic person, that not only is there often a lack of autism understanding, but there is a false understanding based on often dangerous stigmatizing attitudes. And I think this led to a lot of problems for the people we spoke to, because they were misunderstood, they could not explain their difficulties, they found it very difficult to access support. And if you look at all of the factors that I'll explain from this presentation, I think underlying almost all of them is at core lack of understanding. And the next factor that we came across, which is very common, was strain on mental health. Now, there's a very high comorbidity between being autistic and having poor mental health. So rates of anxiety and depression are very high for autistic people. And autistic people often have conditions such as OCD, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, that sort of thing, which can exacerbate difficulties. So yeah, I think mental health problems were very common amongst people we interviewed. And as we explained later, universities did not do sufficiently to tackle those mental health problems. And then I think a combination of a lack of understanding and poor mental health and other factors, frankly, led to a lot of autistic people feeling like an outsider and having an outsider status. Certainly for myself, when I was at university, I was very isolated. I felt alone. I felt as if no one understood me. And at the time, frankly, I really understood myself because I had not received a diagnosis at that point. And I think there's a very strong sense of autistic people feeling as if it's them against the world and really struggling to integrate with others. But also, of course, that is an indictment of others not integrating with them. It's a two-way street. And I do feel as if a lot of the people we spoke to felt like outsiders. And there was also a strong sense amongst the 10 people we interviewed who had not received a diagnosis, wishing and yearning that they had received a diagnosis. Because I think they felt that support would have come a lot easier and they would have understood themselves a lot more if they had been diagnosed. So these are just 4 systemic issues which we uncovered. And the next overarching theme that me and Eilidh came to were challenges pertaining specifically to universities. And I think the first main challenge that autistic people had was the sheer culture shock. Going to university, even for neurotypical students, is a rite of passage, and it is a very dramatic time in your life. For so many, it's the first time in your life where you have to cook, clean, wash, shop all by yourself. And certainly you have all of this freedom, and often you're not sure what to do with it. And of course, for the first time, you have to live independently and study effectively by yourself because there's a lot less structure in university study compared to at school, college, whatever. So I think the sheer shock of having to manage independent life and study, And when you add along with that high expectations from yourself, parents, loved ones, friends, the fact that the sensory environment at universities is really very poor for autistic people. I mean, especially in America, we have those massive campuses with tens of thousands of students. From a sensory standpoint, there really are persona non grata for autistic students. And they almost come out of their way to be as noisy and loud and boisterous as possible. And it's just very, very difficult to live your life with all these challenges in a very challenging sensory environment. And overall, I think these problems then led to a feeling of becoming disengaged. And there were so many autistic students who slowly felt disengaged, and that was exacerbated by a lack of proactive support. Certainly, amongst the people we spoke to, they were suffering from mental health problems, they were struggling with their work, they were having a lot of problems, they needed support, and then the support was not available for them. And they were not sure where to go, who to speak to, when to go, even how to ask for help. And in many cases, support was hard to come by, and when it did arrive, it wasn't much good, because the people there to support them and a poor understanding of autism and how to help them. So I think there is a lack of support, there's a massive culture shock, that leads to a feeling of disengagement, feelings of who could have helped, what could have helped, and I think overall that then leads to a feeling that dropping out becomes the only option, either to save your mental health or because you're behind with your work and you're not going to pass your exams. And then the last overarching theme that we came up with was life after dropping out. Because I think dropping out of university can be a traumatic time. It can induce great feelings of shame, disappointment, low self-esteem, feeling like a failure. And the absolute opposite is true. Autistic people have remarkable strength and resilience. Just to get to university is a remarkable achievement. And it is not an indictment on autistic people whatsoever that they may have dropped out because they were in an environment completely unsuited to them. And I think if we have an underlying message from this research, do what's right for you. So if it is the right thing for you to drop out, sort your life out, and then maybe go back to university later on and graduate then, if that's the right thing to do, then do it. And there's a quote there at the bottom actually from one of my correspondents saying, it was pretty much the worst period of my life really. For me, that was rock bottom. And that just says it all about the difficulties so many autistic people face. Okay, so the next slide is other key findings, and I hope you enjoy the picture of a key that I found and copied and pasted on this presentation. So of those that we interviewed, the majority already had pre-existing mental health conditions. And to use a perhaps slightly painful analogy, I felt like in a lot of cases, mental health problems were like a firework, and then university set them off. And in so many cases, there were already warning signs of struggling with stress, anxiety, and executive functioning, that sort of thing. And then university means such a shock to the system. That means such a sea change in their day-to-day life. I think that exacerbated those underlying mental health conditions. And perhaps most interestingly, of those who were diagnosed as autistic before they started at university, and even with a diagnosis, they found the support on offer was often inadequate. And so for all the 10 correspondents who almost all said that they felt an early diagnosis would have helped, I think it would have helped, but it would not have been a panacea. And it would not have been some sort of like dramatic cure. I think they still would have had a lot of problems. I still needed a lot of support. But I don't think it would have been the be all and end all. I think a lot of the problems they would have suffered from, they would still have done so, even with an early diagnosis. Perhaps most interestingly of all, so a number of our correspondents struggled with feeling alone and isolated. That's no surprise, really. And of course, isolation is incredibly punishing, has awfully detrimental effects. But one impact that I had not foreseen myself before undertaking this research was how, from an academic standpoint, you miss out on a lot of learning when you are isolated. Because students, when they are social and when they are talking with other people in their study groups, they are consciously and subconsciously, they are learning from one another. So they are pooling each other's learning, they are understanding from each other how to work, what the work is. They're learning lots of crucial details, and without even realizing, they are sort of teaching each other about the work at hand. And autistic people are missing out on this because they were so isolated, and they were getting no tips, no advice, and there was just no support for them, either direct or indirect. So the next slide is overall interpretation. And I think one of the main interpretations is how autistic students would benefit massively from additional support when transitioning to university. Because I'm not sure if this is the case in the US, but certainly in the UK, there is very little to no preparation before starting at university. I mean, you may visit university once, maybe even twice, and that's it. If we could build an infrastructure where, while transitioning, you sort your accommodation, where you study, the local town, where to shop, where to access leisure and recreation opportunities. If we can prepare autistic students much better for university and help their transition and not leave them completely ill prepared for when they start, that can only be a good thing. And then when they are at university, support needs to be accessible and clear. And as you can see from the quote on the right there, that's one of my correspondents saying that there needs to be a point of contact when autistic people on the course, if they're struggling with understanding instructions or struggling with the structure and organising their time. Because so many students really struggle with the lack of structure, having to study by themselves, like being unsure of what to study, how to study it, and who to study at times. And because they're missing out on the learning from others as well, that means that support needs to be accessible, clear, and well signposted. The next minute point is that there are a number of systemic issues that are at play. And while universities should do a lot better, there are still a lot of underlying core issues which frankly will take a very long time to solve. It'll be, I imagine, another generation until we truly start building an infrastructure in society which truly adapts to autistic and neurodiverse people. Because at the time, frankly, as autistic people, we are forced to try and integrate into a society which does not adapt for us. And the strain on that is highly conducive, I think, to mental health problems and other issues. And lastly, the university experience can be very traumatic, and we do as much as we can to prevent this trauma. And as you can see in the quote box on the right there in blue, that is one of my correspondents saying, "Don't blame yourself if dropping out does happen. There are so many reasons that university does not look out for someone, as some of them are very flexible with time, experience, and more support." Amen.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some implications from this work. I think it's obvious that we need more evidence-based transitions support, and there's some work by colleagues down at the University of Bath. They've tried out some great support programs that, as Jack described, try and help students get into university, understand what it's going to be like. And I think there's been some evidence suggesting that these transition programs can be helpful, but I don't know if there's much evidence yet on whether they help avoid students dropping out. So there's more work needed there. As we've talked about as well, that idea of making sure people understand autism better, we could really do with lots of staff training to make sure that staff understand some of the systemic barriers that exist that affect autistic people, especially when they're at university. And this is where it's been fantastic to be involved with Kristen and TC on their amazing project, trying to train staff. So it's been really great to have the Canvas group, which has really initiated this project, and to see this happening internationally is brilliant. So I really hope we'll find some promising results there, and hopefully see that our training really does help staff to better understand autistic students and be able to support them as effectively as possible. As well, I don't know for sure what the model is over there in the States, but in the UK, our academic staff are often personal tutors, where we're assigned students who we have to meet with regularly and help support them on a more pastoral level. Well, these tutors were often untrained completely, but also a lot of our participants in the interview study talked about how their tutor hadn't been very approachable or knowledgeable in terms of how to support them. And so tutors just need to consider like how they can be more approachable, because they're often the first person someone will go to if they need a bit of help. And being dismissed can really put you off going back to that person or trying to get support. As well, generally academically, I think a lot could be done in terms of making sure the way we teach is flexible, it's well structured, and there's clear expectations. And I'm actually quite excited for the coming autumn semester, where we're now being asked, at least at University of Stirling, everything's going to be online. And I think that actually does help us with structure. And I'm quite excited to see how things go this coming year, and how this might actually be something that's quite accessible and benefit autistic students. So our conclusions from Jack.
Okay, so in conclusions, and I hope that you like the check-it tag we've got on the right-hand side. So in conclusions, so a lack of autism knowledge and understanding, plus underlying stigmatizing attitudes, I think underpin both the societal and the university-specific problems that we uncovered. And that an environment which is designed to suit and understand the needs of autistic people can benefit all students. And this is a principle related to universal design. So as an example, if we can't build a university infrastructure where there is much better mental health support, where there is support that is signposted, where the structure of the work is much more adaptable, where tutors are much more approachable. And if we can make those sorts of changes, that benefit everyone, not just autistic students. And as an example, there is a 2008 study of Italian university reforms where the degree structures are more flexible, and there is an increase in provision of support services, and this found an increase in dropout rate. And while dropout rate is not the be all and end all, I imagine it led to a much happier studying environment. And lastly, do what's right for you. So if you are struggling, if the support there is inadequate, and if you do need to drop out to do what's right for you, do it.
So thank you very much for listening to our talk. The research we talked about has been published, so please look it up if you're interested in reading more of the exciting details. But please, if you've got any questions, you can also email us or tweet us. But a huge thank you to Royal Holloway, which is where I used to work, and they help support this research. And of course, a big thank you to all of the autistic people who supported this research. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Eilidh and Jack. That was fantastic. And I'll mention to folks that in our chat box, and it will be in the meeting minutes as well, that Patrick kindly included the link to the article for folks to check out on their own time. We have a few questions in the chat box. We'll have about 10 minutes or so toward that end. Please feel free to keep entering them, and we'll try to attend to as many in the time allotted. The first one listed here comes from John, which is, when you say lack of understanding, is that the understanding coming from others or understanding of self-awareness of their own autism, or maybe both?
In terms of our research, I think we're talking about it in terms of from others.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, but I think, that's a good point about self-awareness as well, because I think that point about diagnosis and Jack's own experiences, as you said, like not realizing you were autistic until later and after university.
Yeah.
And then that realization, after that, things kind of changed for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I openly admit that I did not understand myself at university, and therefore I have sympathy for others who didn't understand me either. But that indicates a lack of I mean, the fact that I do not understand myself, I think, is an indictment upon society, that I was not diagnosed till so late, and that no one else thought that I might be autistic. So I think even that in itself is an indictment of an overall lack of awareness, which as a society and on a much wider scale than just universities do need to tackle.
Thanks for sharing. Another question comes in. I'm recognizing that there are a number of comments that are very complimentary and validating of what you all have shared as well. Another question comes in from Beth, which is, have you examined survey results for neurotypicals and students with other disabilities to see if these results for autistic students' dropout rates and experiences are different?
So in our research, we didn't have a comparison with neurotypicals, and I absolutely think that is something that's needed for sure. But what's actually interesting is there is actually quite a lot of literature out there already on neurotypicals and why neurotypical students drop out. And some of that literature suggests things like financial difficulties being a big reason, and feeling like the course they chose wasn't the right one for them. So I think we did identify some unique themes towards autistic people. So I think it is something, though, it would be nice to do actual direct comparative study, and that's definitely an area of research we could explore. So yeah, it's a very good point.
Yeah, and as an autistic person, I think you could make a very bleak joke about how neurotypicals have all the research we have hardly any. There's probably a very dark joke in there somewhere as well.
All right, well, I certainly encourage folks to enter questions, as we still have a little bit of time toward that end. There might be a few coming in the next minute. Yes, and it seems like there's a question. I don't have institutional access to the articles. Would it be possible to share the full text?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
So
and there's a question there about disclosure and did disclosure and mid or late diagnosis predict the risk of non-completion? It didn't actually in our study. I was quite surprised by that because I did wonder, but actually there was no difference. And I think partly in the survey, at least, majority of participants were late diagnosed after university. So I think that is a slight limitation as well on our survey, even though we had a reasonable sample. That even those who'd graduated, 60% I think weren't diagnosed till after university. So I think I'd like to do more research, which actually, I'd like to see more data of folk who are diagnosed before university and be able to compare, because I think we just simply couldn't answer that question sufficiently with the data that we had.
thanks for catching that question. There's definitely a lot of comments and things to sort through. Summer has a question. I am curious about your thoughts on why the percentage of females dropping out of higher education was higher.
I'm not sure why that would be. Yeah. I don't know.
If I could suggest a theory, it's that in all strands of autism, women are massively discriminated against. So I wrote an article for a UK website a few years ago, because in the UK anyway, it's a 4-to-1 male to female ratio of those who are diagnosed as autistic. And as an autistic person, I can tell you now that there is in no way on earth is there a true 4-to-1 male to female autistic ratio. That's utter nonsense, and it's an indictment of diagnosis provision and other factors at play. And I would say that perhaps that discrimination also extends to universities, because the diagnosis criteria is very poor. There is a fundamental lack of support for female autistics, even compared to male autistics. And perhaps that may be a reason why female dropout rate is higher. That's not quantified by much evidence, frankly. That's simply my opinion, but that might give some clue as to why that is the case.
This is Cheryl Widman from the University of Illinois. Can I say something? So Jack, everything that you described totally described my experience when I was a young undergrad, but nobody, not even I, understood what was going on.
Yeah.
Basically took diagnosis of my son in 1998 by Catherine Lord to begin to understand the issues that I had. And because of that, because of my own experiences, that led me into making sure he had a transition program when he went to Purdue University in 2002. So my special interest has been post-secondary education since 1998 and trying to understand my own experiences, which as a researcher led me to Tinto 1975, which really compares dropping out to being like an act of suicide. So we females know that we're underdiagnosed because often what we're experiencing is masked by other comorbid disorders such as anxiety, depression, OCD, and the list goes on. And that's why we're not being diagnosed. First and foremost, because there's really no really good assessment that captures the female phenotype. And now we're finding out there are different biomarkers for us. So getting back to why maybe females are dropping out is because we have incredible depression, which is the first thing that really causes us to not be able to cope. Not to mention all the other executive function problems that we experience. Maybe I should turn myself on so you can see me. So we have so many different executive function issues that we're not able to manage, such as our managing of time, et cetera. And an entire self-determination issue that we really quite haven't figured out. And the research shows that executive function for individuals with autism may never fully develop. And we understand from the research now, and this all underpins my own research, we understand now that executive function skills and other skills, brain maturation may not occur until the 4th decade of life. All the reason more why we need to ensure that there's a transition program, again, my special interest since 1998, and ensuring in England and the UK that the adequate supports for individuals to transition become standardized somehow, and that with special attention given to the fact that females and males as well have a high degree of comorbidity with depression, something like 75%, Jackson et al., if I'm not mistaken, have experienced suicidal ideations, which really fits together again with Tinto. So I'm suggesting reading Tinto 1975 and beyond in terms of integration into campuses, et cetera, and the importance of that issue. So I hope this provides a little perspective.
Thank you, Cheryl. That resonates with me as well. I was diagnosed after I became a lecturer, and also went through this experience that was described in the study and that you commented on. My comorbidity was anxiety, not depression.
Oh, I'm everything. I just used to say I have so many different, disabilities, which is the reason why it took me 11 years to complete my PhD, but hey, I did it. And I used to joke, I'm a special educator. So I used to joke, we had an IEP for me throughout my PhD so that I could get myself through it. And I'm still not diagnosed. So I identify as BAP, but I am textbook Asperger's syndrome. I have these special interests and here I am.
I mean, clinicians aren't trained enough to diagnose autism in women, so that could be another reason why women are diagnosed late with autism.
Yeah, we need a gender neutral assessment, and we just don't have that. And I've called upon people that are psychologists to begin considering what we need to do. I think the WHO might have an assessment that's more comprehensive, but right now ADOS, which I was trained in as a LEN trainee, is still the gold standard. And for so long, I assumed that to be autistic, you had to be like my son, which meant that you were a math savant who went on to become a computer scientist. I thought that's what autism was for the longest time. My son's a PhD from UCLA, and he's now a lecturer in computer science at Clemson University. So very proud of him, of course, and he's inspired all my research. But I see all these different gaps that we have, not just in the United States, but certainly in the UK. And I have a special interest in the UK because I have so many friends that live there and are academics there as well. So, we need certainly to have these transition programs everywhere. And we need to take into account brain research, which is, again, a big deal in my own research. As a special educator, I don't think we can begin to understand how to educate people unless we understand what treatments we're applying to different parts of the brain. And so executive function and self-determination, which, is really two of the biggest issues that we really need to be focusing on in post-secondary. And what we need to be doing is beginning already in secondary education to begin teaching the skills through a comprehensive transition program to post-secondary, so that a lot of these experiences and deficits that individuals have are not so severe by the time they get to post-secondary. And how do we integrate socially, which is all about the Tinto model from 1975. So I'm a huge fan of Tinto, and also Waymeyer, 1999, which also underpins my own research for self-determination. That entire self-determination model is so important to be able to look at that as well. So I highly recommend that if you're considering creating a transition program over there. And I'm sure all the other transition specialists here would, have a lot of different things that they see as important, obviously.
Well, thanks for your contributions. I know there's been a lot of great feedback in the chat room or the chat box as well. We'll be compiling those comments, so in case folks didn't have a chance to read through those during our time today, we will have those in the meeting minutes. Really great questions and dialogue, and I envision a lot of these points to continue, and Cheryl's going to be one of our presenters later in the coming months, so we can hear more from Cheryl there as well. So lots of great dialogue from everybody. Let's thank both Eilidh and Jack again for their time. I know the resources that they had shared and the article we'll be putting all together for all of you, so it's in a nice, easy to find spot, along with a link to the video recording from today and the slides. So we encourage you to check that out. Also want to point your attention to our next Canvas meeting, which is scheduled for Thursday, September 17th, same time, so that would be 11 a.m. Eastern time. Once again, we'll have a speaker from across the pond, at least from here in the US. We're going to be welcoming on Dr. Jonathan Vincent from York St. John University, as he discusses transitions from higher education for autistic students and graduates, qualitative insights from the UK context. So continuing to examine some of these themes. In the meantime, we encourage you to be part of our Canvas listserv and contribute your resources. One thing that we constantly see with our Canvas meetings is once the presentations move along, there's a lot of great questions and thoughts that emerge. So we welcome that. Wishing all of you a great rest of your week. Stay well, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. This was great. Thanks.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.